Yes. Invocation.
Good evening and welcome to Chennai. We will be going ahead with the function. At the outset, we'd like to thank all of you to be on the dot at 6. And it is really nice that we have a punctual intellectual start. Now we will have the invocation, which is the traditional Tamil Thai Marthu, followed by the program. Dr. Kumaresan will render the Tamil Thai Marthu.
Nandri. நீராறும் கடலொடுத்த நிலமடந்தை கெழிலொழுகும் சீராறும் வதனமென திகழ்வரத கண்டமிதில் தெக்கனமும் அதில் சிறந்த திராவிடனல் திருநாடும் தக்க சிறு பிறை நுதலும் தரித்தரும் திலகமுமே அத்திலக வாசனை போல் அனைத்துலகும் இன்பமுற எத்திசையும் புகழ் மணக்க இருந்த பெரும் தமிழனங்கே தமிழனங்கே நின் சீரிலமை திறமையந்து புகழ் மறந்து வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே.
Thank you.
Good evening, Vanakkam and Namaste and welcome. I am Advocate Rajasekaran and I welcome this August gathering, which gives me a sense of pride since it's an intellectual meeting across diverse dignitaries who converged for a national cause. Now over to the grand launch of 10 Flashpoints 20 years, authored by Shri Manish Tewari, former Union Minister and present Member of Parliament, Lok Sabha. Now I call upon our dignitaries onto the dais. I'm honored and privileged to welcome our chief guest, the most respected Sri M.K. Narayanan sir, former IB Director, NSA and Governor of West Bengal, for the launch of the book 10 Flashpoints, 20 Years. The author, Sri Manish Tewari sir, former Union Minister and present Member of Parliament Lok Sabha. And the host of this evening, Mr. C. Rajasekaran, lawyer and founder of Voice of TamizhNadu. And the moderator, Sri Arunram sir, Resident Editor, Times of India, who would be interacting about the book with the author and the dignitaries present. I also welcome our esteemed guests present here for this evening and for the time taken. I request the host, Mr. C. Rajasekaran, lawyer and founder of Voice of TamizhNadu, who is the darling of media, to introduce the book 10 Flashpoints, 20 Years. Over to you, sir.
Good evening to one and all. It's a great honor, privilege. I'm humbled that you all have gathered here for this wonderful event which is happening today in Chennai. And Mr. Manish Tewari sir is here, the author of the book, and the most revered doyen of Indian Police Service, Mr. M.K. Narayanan sir is the chief guest here, and Mr. Arunram, the resident editor of Times of India, will be interacting with. And I would right away go to the introduction of this 10 Flashpoints, 20 Years, written by Sri Manish Tewari sir. This is a perfect time because the war clouds are looming around the globe. Ukraine, Russia, and everybody is aware of war. But I don't know whether when you wrote the book, you would have anticipated this moment. And this is definitely a trilogy of pleasure, privilege, and pride to introduce the book. Much like Mark Antony, inspired by Caesar, who made people think that mourn and reflect than react with maturity in the case of national security. Before the esteemed National Security Advisor, Governor, statesman speaks about the multifaceted, multi-talented, author come leader, politician, what not? He is everything in one 6 foot tall gentleman, the author. And I would borrow the words from Happy Mom, Jacob, from the prologue. I am delighted to present to you this important book with crucial insights and lessons of India, national security and foreign policy. Ruthless truth and honest introspect are absolutely necessary investments which yield interest in the national security. The vibrant political intellectual and the environment allows the self-reflection. The book 10 Flashpoints, 20 Years has made a record-breaking history in this short span of time. I would again want to reiterate that an individual, courageous parliamentarian who has donned the caps of author, leader, expert parliamentarian, and external affairs, policy affairs. The book even attempts to deal with resolving and celebrates the value of men of success as Otto von Bismarck's Art of the Possible. Again, I want to make a very valid point. I don't want to praise Manish Tewari ji or sir, whoever we address, but he is a man who has the real courage to call a spade, which he has done it in the book. I will also appreciate it and thank him for having that courage and also criticizing the UPA government in power, and now has the real guts, because we don't see anybody speak against the present 8 years of this government. And I would also say that member of parliament inside the parliament, the Punjab, the tiger from Punjab, the lion from Punjab, whichever you can put as per your wishes, always rose inside the parliament, and everybody is really awestruck when he speaks. I praise him, so he said, "Don't praise me." So he made it very clear, but I'm not able to control my feelings, because an MP who has the courage, who writes a book, who has given his opinion in all the areas of governance, and as a minister, he has shown what has to be done in the future digital arena, the digital era, which is now very active. We may go through several physical wars, but we are going to encounter the digital wars. That's what I also feel, that it's high time that we all speak out, like the author who has spoken out his mind, because all the documents related to war are declassified, which he
no ordinary intellectual. He's a thinking person. He knows what he's writing about. As Mr. Rajasekaran said, he's not afraid to speak what he thinks is right. And therefore, I think it's indeed a privilege to be asked to launch 10 flashpoints, 20-year national security situation that impacted India. It so happens that most of the incidents that he refers to are the period that I was very much in Delhi. I think there is a bit of a conspiracy in this. Because I cannot say all that I wish to. I cannot also debunk what he says, because I know what he has written is the truth. So it has been, it was easy to read the book. It has been difficult to comment on the book, because as I said, it's difficult to challenge the truth. So I think we do find people challenge the truth these days. So I've tried to adhere as close as I could to my version of the truth, which is not always necessarily what Mr. Manish Tewari has written in the book. But deep down, I know that what he's written is the real truth. And it is for that reason, I think, that you should buy the book and read the book, and of course add to Mr. Tewari's offers to some extent on that basis. I owe a special debt of gratitude that, in my opinion, among the many publications on national security which I have had the opportunity to read, at least those which are published in India and in recent years, I think this was by far the very best. I'm not saying this to sort of just praise Mr. Tewari or to hope for some favors from him. I think I'm too old now to receive it. And I don't think there are too many favors that Mr. Manish Tewari has to offer. So between the two, I think it's possible for me to speak what I honestly believe is my understanding of what is written and the truth of the matter. When I say that this is one of the best books that I have read on national security, I think there are members of this audience who know my long association with national security. I think it's nearly more than 60 years, which is, I think, the age of many of the age of all the younger members of the audience put together. So, I know what I'm talking about. And therefore, what I find most captivating about this book is, first, the level of scholarship. People write books. People write commitments. Arun Kumar is here. I also write articles. Scholarship is something which is missing in most of that. And I dare say that many of the books that I read, there is the viewpoint based to some extent, because I've interacted with President Bush. So therefore I take a particular view. You will have to judge whether it is good or bad when you read the article. But this book, avoids that kind of what I call personal reflection. It is a textbook. It brings out in stark detail facts. And as I said, since he chose to write about events that most of it happened during my period when I was around in Delhi, that it shows, as I said, not only scholarship, not only honesty, but also a willingness to avoid his own personal angles. And I think that's a very important point. Before I comment on some of the chapters, some of which I agree with and some points on which I disagree, I want to make a mention of the prologue by Happymon Jacob. I was very worried that Rajesh would take away the best part of what I wanted to say. But Happymon Jacob, as some of you know, teaches diplomacy and disarmament study in the School of International Study, Jawaharlal Nehru University. In his summing up of the book, he says that it is one of exceptional merit. Usually when you hear such words, one tends to think that this is, the author has put him up to it. It's obviously too much of praise. I think this is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I can do hardly better than this, as the book, as I said, carries the stamp of exceptional authorship. That's the part of honesty that I'm going to say nice things about you. Thereafter I shall move into uncharted territory. I will refer here to only some of the chapters in the book. Though as I said, much of what is, well, almost all of it covers the period that I was very much in the thick of things. Before I jump into the main thing, I want to ask Rajji why he harps in many places on what he says is the absence of a national security doctrine for India, as if it is the panacea for all our security problems. I know that this is what many people say, but I wonder whether this is really the panacea that we need. While the national security doctrine has its uses, it is certainly not the answer to our security problems. I just want to say that. I hope you will comment on it in many speak. Another aspect that I refer to, which also Rajesh mentioned a few weeks ago, is the reference to cyber. In my dotage, present dotage, I also happen to be involved in cybersecurity in a fairly extensive way. I'm the chairman of an international cybersecurity group, and therefore have some knowledge of this new area of warfare that we have called that. I want to take this opportunity, without contesting what was said by both Manish and Rajesh, that please do not wait for a cyber Pearl Harbor. As one fine day, something is going to burst. What we need to be worried about, and the real danger, is that cyber attacks like ransomware are going to be almost an everyday occurrence. And they have the capacity to destroy the fundamentals of a nation and being. We need to be prepared for this and not wait for that, like a war which comes once in a few years or whatever it is. I thought I'd take this opportunity to stress that. Now, coming to the specific contents, once again I begin by saying that I found that going through the chapters, I found that most of what he said is highly authentic. Particularly, I want to stress that portion of the book where he says the how and why of India's nuclear progress. I say without any degree of hesitation that this is a must-read. I think it's the best possible coverage of India's nuclear journey in that respect. And I would urge all members who are present here, particularly the younger members, to read it. Because, like cyber, nuclear is going to be a very major part of our future. And we need to understand as to where we started on the nuclear journey, where we are, and where we should be in the future. I think the part 1 and part 2 are covered very extensively. Tewari has touched upon part 3. But I think what this chapter does is kindle people's interest as to why we went on that road, and how we went on that road, and where we are on that road. And we therefore, it's for the members, particularly younger members, to take matters on. It so happened, more by accident than by design, that I was a member of the first 2 National Security Advisory Boards way back in 2000. And this is when the idea was mooted that we should have a nuclear doctrine. And I was one amongst the sort of people who were associated in writing out the draft nuclear doctrine. I must commend you, Tewari ji, for capturing the nuances of the doctrine, which I think most authors fail to understand and recognize. I would like to compliment you for this. From this, I would like to fast forward to the chapter on what you said, India's nuclear Shangri-La. I think that's the chapter. Yeah, Shangri-La. I like the use of the term Shangri-La, which again demonstrates, and I underline this. There are not too many young people in the audience, but if there were, I would like to say that you need to understand how a trained mind can master the intricacies and ambiguities of nuclear diplomacy. I mean, it's fascinating. This morning I had breakfast with a fairly important personality. I do not wish to mention his name for obvious reasons. There's many pressmen around and I don't want to be challenged on this tomorrow. And he was asking me because he's from another country. He's asking me, how did India manage to get on and have a sort of a nuclear arrangement with the United States? Because he said, I think it's most complicated, very tendentious in many manners, and particularly India had been in the dock for a long time. It's of course a long journey, but if you read the book, and I think in many ways it's the best possible analysis of what we did. I mean, short of the very, very sort of secret aspects that may be there, it clearly brings out how exactly we moved from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, and what are the difficulties that we face. To understand the many twists and turns, it's quite a complicated exercise. Then to put it down on paper and make other people understand is an even more difficult exercise. But it's done so. And as I said, I think if you can extract this chapter and have it, put out in public, many people who may not read the book in total, and may say that many of the events are now long gone by, no longer. I think this chapter particularly will be relevant for at least the next 2 to 3 decades, because we are still not at the beginning, but we're certainly not at the end of our nuclear journey. So you need to understand, the younger members need to understand how and where we started, how we went, what were the difficulties that we faced, and particularly the kind of problems we faced. Not only within the country, not only outside the country, but within the country. People who are naysayers, who don't want this to be done, and kind of thing. All this has been brought out succinctly. It's not an easy feat. You need to read it maybe once or twice to fully understand the contents. But I think this is a great service that Tewari has done in sort of producing it in his book. And I think one thing that I want to compliment him is that he's not afraid of saying that this would not have been possible but for the two principles of the President of the United States, George Bush, and of course our Prime Minister at the time, Manmohan Singh. The two of them established a kind of connection which, whatever we hear about other Prime Ministers talking to somebody else, etc., I think was extraordinary. Mr. George Bush believed that Mr. Manmohan Singh was someone who was good for India. I mean, he never went. So when the State Department, the Department of Energy raised objections, he would say he would only ask his National Security Advisor. His National Security Advisor and I were the two sort of co-hosts for this thing. He said that, does Mr. Manmohan Singh want this? And that's what he was there to overrule these things. I think when Mr. Manish has mentioned this time, I think it's something that we need to understand the significance of how many things are done, not so much by, I know there are many lawyers, not the legal criticizes always that are present, but what is the weight that both two leaders have, which bring together two countries. So I think that is the point that comes out succinctly in this book. I think I mentioned it to Manish, but there's one point in the book where I want to contest. I mean, I'm not contesting it because he mentioned at one point in the book that he asked Mr. Manmohan Singh how he got people on the Indian side people to agree, and he said that he got this from Manmohan Singh as to how it happened. I have a slightly different take on this because it robs me of my role. So I think my role also is there, but I shall not press that point because Manmohan Singh has a phenomenal memory. I could never challenge him on that. So if he thinks it slightly differently, I don't want to contest it. But I just want the author of this trying to realize that lesser men also played a role. But one point I think he mentioned, and I think it hasn't been properly appreciated very much, I will quote him. He says that the Indo-US civil nuclear deal demolished the architecture of nuclear apartheid, carefully constructed by the international community after India's first peaceful nuclear explosion on 18 May 1974. I would like everybody to recognize how significant this statement is. With one single decision, the nuclear deal, India was lifted from becoming an outcast into a member of the Indian nuclear community. And I said, today, I had somebody who came to ask, how do you people manage to do it? I've told him, but I tell him now, please read the book by Mr. Manish Tewari. We have some idea about how we do it. Books. For me, the nuclear chapter was probably the most interesting because I was a big player as far as that is concerned. But there are two chapters, one on Kargil and the other on Operation Parakram, on which I would like to make a few comments. Here on Kargil, I have some reservations in endorsing Tewari's assessment that Kargil was a resounding military victory for India. It was certainly a victory for India, but hardly, I think, a resounding one. At least that's my assessment. Why do I say so? I say that because while India managed to reverse the initial gains made by Pakistan in the Kargil heights and establish its superiority, it did result in a kind of stalemate. largely because at that time we went in for a certain amount of international cooperation or arbitration or whatever it is. And countries like the United States that have tried to exploit the situation to achieve what they want, to act as an arbiter between India and Pakistan. But the Kargil conflict is in many ways critical because of many things that took place. One is that it led to a complete, if I would say, review and overhaul of the Indian intelligence and defense establishment. But for Kargil, I think this would never have happened. It's not easy to move the defense establishment and the intelligence establishment to do things. And only the Kargil conflict could have achieved that. In particular, I think I would stress that what was achieved as a result of the Kargil conflict was the setting up of committees to review intelligence, internal security and defense matters. And today we have the National Security Council, the National Security Advisory Board, the Institution of Chief of Defense Staff, and in some ways, not much talked about it, but I think critically important, the National Technical Research Organization, which is largely modeled on the lines of the National Security Agency of the United States and the GCSU of the UK. The point I want to stress in this book is how Tewari ji has not missed a beat in delineating in detail each of these steps. Once again, I compliment him for his intricate mind and his capacity for scholarship. There is a point in the book, I think there are these, yeah? There is a point in the book, in the chapter, where he refers to the frustration expressed by one of his senior colleagues about the multitude of intelligence agencies adding to confusion.
Karti's father.
I didn't say that. So I'm going to hit it. If I had known that Karti was going to be present, I would have used the next words. I said, what I've written was that I'm only reminded of the biblical saying, God forgive them, for they know not what they say. But I mean, while this is not the forum to discuss the merits or demerits of this statement, the point is, and it's important to stress it, that you may refer to it as a multitude of intelligence agencies, but each agency serves a purpose. And the occasional or many failures, as you may call it, are not due to the plethora of such agencies, but to human and technical inadequacies. On Operation Parakram, I have a major, what should I say, conflict of understanding with the author. My view, and I think there are quite a few who are the same thinking, is that Operation Parakram was a waste of time and opportunity. I think it achieved little and did not, I think we spent a fair amount of money on this. At another point, the author has drawn a parallel, I'm not sure whether I'm right in using the word parallel, between Pakistan's Kargil misadventure and the Chinese incursion to eastern Ladakh in early 2020. I want to stress the point because I think the Chinese threat is not something that we can overlook in any manner. I think the Chinese aggression in Ladakh is quite different from what I refer to as the Kargil misadventure. In that, China's aggression is part of a long-standing, deeply laid plan to unsettle India's legitimate claims to vast tracts of the undelineated Sino-Indian border. It's not a one-off. It's a long-term effort. It is very calculated. it's done at particular times to set the message, etc. So China's incursion into the Galwan area was a clear signal to India that, okay, we might have had Wuhan, we might have had Mabalapuram, but relations between us are not going to be the same from here on. Please understand that. And I think we have yet to fully comprehend the implications of what we have of this, and we wait and see how it turns out. So I just want to make a slight distinction. I don't know whether I misunderstood what he had kind of said. I now come to the most painful chapter of the book, as far as I am concerned. Tiwariji's chapter on 2611. 2611 is the 26th of November 2008. We had completed the nuclear deal in September of that year, and we were all very happy about what was happening. Within 2 months, I became from hero to zero because I was attacked for the failure to anticipate or do anything to prevent the 2611 attack. In reading through the chapter was like pouring salt into an old wound. But I have this to say of Tiwariji and his writing, that there was no attempt on his part to sort of exaggerate the degree of failure and excoriate all of us who were part of the establishment, the intelligence and internal security establishment at the period. But he has done it in a very clinical fashion. It's seldom that you find anybody writing on this subject in this manner. And I think it is what I would call an excellent example of how you should approach problems of this kind, rather than going to ecstasies of what has been achieved or what has not been achieved. He does refer to, of course, India's delayed response to the November 26 attack. I agree with him. It was delayed. We failed to muster our forces in time. After 2611 and after Abdul Father became the Home Minister, we went through a series of exercises by which I think we have a much better and quicker response time today. Essentially, the coastal areas are now much better guarded than they were during that period. And I would say that this comes out in very clear detail in the book. But I do want to have a, I don't want to say contradiction, but I want to have conflict with Manish Tewari. Why did we not attack Pakistan? This is an old story. Many people have written, including many who were part of the establishment during the period. But it is not lack of will or any kind of fear of any kind. It was a calculated decision. We don't, at that time, and I dare say even now, we don't have forces like the GST-9 or the SEAL and whatnot to carry out what you may call a pinpointed attack and eliminate the terrorists who are responsible. We always have the choice of bombing large establishments. The Americans do that. They never talk of the collateral damage that is caused to civilians. It's to some extent to what is happening in Ukraine today. A lot of them. Are the Russians attacking only military targets? No, I think they're killing civilians. So that it was a decision by the Cabinet Committee of Security, to which I contributed, to say that this is not the time for us to do this. It has been debated and discussed thereafter. I do think that world opinion fully agrees with what I think the people of India gave a resounding victory to Manmohan Singh a few months, the Manmohan Singh government a few months later also agreed with it. But it's always useful to keep talking, saying what we could have done. We could have given Pakistan a bloody nose, and we can do this and we can do that. But I would say that in the affairs of men and matters, one needs to be careful as to what you do, so that you are not held guilty of killing people just for the sake that you can claim victory or credit after something has been done. So I leave it at that point. Coming to the Chinese challenge, once again I might use the word intrigued that a political leader of Manish Tewari's standing should write such a clinical piece on Sino-Indian relations and in such great detail. More particularly, I find that his understanding of the document, political parameters and guiding principles for the settlement of the India-China boundary question, the 2005 agreement, when Wen Jiabao, the Chinese Prime Minister, came to Delhi and Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. Across the world, many strategists and thinkers have asked, how did China ever agree to this? Because it is remarkable, for the first time China has, and probably for the last time, has accepted some of the basics of what India had asked for. And the essence was that there would be no change in areas which had settled population. So it was a settled population of Indian origin, there would be no. That after President Xi came to power, some of this has been overturned. Does not take away from the fact that this is a document which will stand the test of time and can at some time be restore India-China relations to what it was in the past. Today I agree that this is no longer the case. Finally, I would like to say that every patriotic Indian should read this book. For as I've said at various points in my dissertation today, it contains a whole lot of carefully analyzed information, seldom found in India. And that too covering, it's not like reading a newspaper article, however it might be written. It stitches together its various points. And I think anyone who has any interest in the nation's present and future should make it a point to buy the book and increase Manish's wealth, and more importantly, enrich themselves in what we need. I will end by saying that I commend Tewari for the service he has rendered to the people of our country in producing a volume of this nature. I've left more important people like Mr. Arunram, etc., to comment on more current developments. I've commented basically on those periods on which I was privileged to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That you're very exhaustive explanation.
Thank you, sir, for your powerful talks. On behalf of the Fourth Estate, I request Mr. Arunram, President Editor, Times of India, to moderate the discussion of the book 10 Flashpoints, 20 Years, with the author, Sri Manish Tewari, our hero of the day, and our honorable Chief Guest, M.K. Narayanan, sir.
There were 3 mics.
So now the resident editor, Mr. Arunram, would moderate and have a discussion with the author and, of course, M.K. Narayan sir. If you are all free to ask questions, you would be given a mic after the discussion. You can ask questions to everybody on the dais. Of course, 3 of them, not me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajasekaran. Good evening, everybody. So Narayan has kind of with a quick fire of surgical strikes has demolished many of my questions. He's already covered, I think, at least 6 of the 10 chapters, and which I'm sure that Manish would answer them when he speaks. I suggest that you can weave in whatever you want to respond to Mr. Narayan's observations rather than questions. And I would also suggest that, sir, you could chip in whenever you feel that you have something more to add than the author. Let me tell you that one of the most impossible things, one of the most difficult things for me as a reader is to forget the author, especially when the author is a politician. I say this as a compliment when sometimes when you read something written by a politician and you tend to forget that it's actually a politician who's written this book. So I think I have to congratulate Manish for that. And thank you for giving us this wonderful piece of, I would call parts of it more of a journalistic work than just a political commentary or an academic piece of work. Before the book was released, I think last December 2021, I think the most spoken about, the most debated thing about the book was the chapter, is it chapter number 4, Manish? About 2611. Okay. About 2611. So, as I said, if any reader forgot that this is written by a politician and no less than Manish Tewari, the BJP was quick to remind you that here is a Congress leader who is critiquing a Congress government for inaction on 2611. Mr. Narayan also spoke about it. So I'm sure that Manish must be tired of answering this question right from the launch of the book, but I think there is no escape, though we all know some of your answers, and for the sake of this audience, I repeat the question. I'll frame it in a different way. Did you expect this kind of a reaction from within your party, from the opposition trying to take advantage of your critique of your own government? Or was it intentional in a way where you, let me be upfront, where you're trying to cement your image as a member of the so-called G23?
First of all, may I thank my friend and colleague Mr. Rajasekaran for hosting this evening in Chennai. May I also thank Mr. Narayanan for actually taking out the time first to read a book, as I said, which are essentially an observer's reflections and in no way can match either the experience or even the scholarship which Mr. Narayanan brings to matters of national security, as someone who almost considers it to be a holy grail not to miss his fortnightly articles in the Hindu. And even if I do miss them, my office actually has instructions to clip them and kind of keep them ready so that they can be read very carefully. And I must confess that Mr. Narayanan's articles are perhaps the most heavily underlined pieces of journalism that are there in my library, and therefore I would like to personally thank him not only for his kind words but for his critique of the book, and I'm really honored, sir, that you took out the time to do this. My thanks to Mr. Arunram, the resident editor of the Times of India, who again was very kind enough to go through the book and is moderating today's evening, and to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, my colleague in Parliament, Mr. Untitled, who took the time out to be here. In fact, sir, I guess what I can discern from the writings, you perhaps are far more busier today than when you were in government. But to answer Mr. Ram's question, well, I think he was still being diplomatic when he asked that question. The thing which he did ask and which I'll answer is that was I being deliberately provocative to sell the book? So the answer to that, of course, is a no. But was I anticipating a reaction of this kind? To be very honest, yes. Unfortunately, we live in very polarized times. So therefore, our debates, our public discourse has become a binary. You are either with somebody or you are against somebody. The ability to be able to, let's say, try and nuance a fine point is unfortunately a lost cause in India's public discourse today. As someone who's been at the receiving end of trying to attempt this foolhardy exercise many times over, I can commend to all my colleague politicians, not to try this fool's errand. But be that as it may, when I went about or started thinking about writing the book, for me it wasn't about writing a book about NDA versus UPA. I mean, that's what I've essentially done for a living as a spokesperson for now 14 years. The idea was to actually look at situations, forget whichever was the government in office at that point in time, and try and see try and analyze what the response was. And that is not even a value judgment on a particular national security team or a particular dispensation, which may have taken those decisions, because, with 6x6 hindsight, you're always wiser. But to deal with an evolving situation and to take decisions as the situation evolves is not something which is really the easiest thing to do, and especially when you're dealing with national security. So therefore, if my observations on 2611 came across as a critique, that wasn't really the intent. It was my estimation, and I have read some of the things which Mr. Narayanan has written subsequently. In fact, subject to correction, I think he did present options to the Cabinet Committee of Security, coercive options to the Cabinet Committee of Security, which obviously would have been considered and possibly not accepted for very, very valid and cogent reasons. And so essentially that was my thinking when I wrote those particular pages. And as I have pointed out earlier, that we didn't arrive at 2611 as a flash in the pan. I mean, 2611 was perhaps the culmination of a very nasty phase of the proxy war, which Pakistan has unleashed against us, beginning post-Kargil, with the IC-814 hijack, on to the Jammu and Kashmir Assembly attack, the attack on the Indian Parliament, which of course unleashed Operation Parakram, and I think maybe I have erred somewhere, because I do share Mr. Narayanan's conclusions that Operation Parakram was actually a waste of time and energy. It really ended up blunting the sword arm of India's coercive diplomacy, and did not yield anything. And then on to, of course, the parallel universe of terror, the bombings, the train bombings in Mumbai, bombings in Delhi, Jaipur, etc. So by the time we came to 26/11, a fair amount of pain had been inflicted upon India. And so therefore, as maybe the last straw on the camel's back, it was my estimation that perhaps a far more robust response was warranted.
That more robust response, you have spelled out the last sentence of chapter 5. It is therefore my considered opinion that India should have actioned a kinetic response in the days following India's 9/11. Mr. Narayan, would you like to agree or disagree on this?
It's easy to sit in a chair and make that statement, but I think one has to also look at the consequence. As I said, if we had the capacity at that time to at least take out one or two of those who were responsible, even if the ringleaders or those thought leaders who were responsible, it might have. I mean, it's good for public image that, all right, we bombed and so 100 people have been killed or 200 people have been killed and so many houses destroyed, etc. With our aerial power and our bombardment capabilities, it's possible to do that. It's a question of what you want to achieve. I think, do you want to act as probably President Putin is doing now, that I feel wrong that I can therefore take it out on hundreds of people, refugees of various kinds? Or do we need to see how do we to create a response which would make Pakistan understand that this is not the way to go about it? I mean, it's something that you can debate. I think by and large, I would say that during the period that Manish Tewari's party was in power, it has leaned towards having respect for human lives, respect for what India stands for. That India does not indulge in indiscriminate attacks. I mean, we're a big country. We can attack all our neighbors and create a great deal of mayhem for them. But at the end of the day, I think most countries do look up to India. And I dare say that without sort of unnecessary harm, what we did achieve, I think the kind of response that India produced in terms of that there are restraints on India's power that we will exercise. Much the same way that people trust us with a nuclear capability. After all, what prevents you from using the nuclear weapon if you want to? It's a kind of restraint that people feel that this country can be expected to follow. So I think it's a question of what is the tenor of your government, what is the tenor of your civilization that you believe in. I think that is what went into it. It didn't require great courage or great will to carry out a series of attacks. Mainly, you could carry bombing raids or etc. and whatnot. But we refrained from doing that because what is the end result? Was the point. As far as the country is concerned, while there was criticism, I don't think anybody asked for the government to be removed. I can at least understand if the option was. Tiwari said that we looked at several options. I had at least 8 options that we had. And we went through one by one, and so tried to see whether any of them were worth carrying out. Not that we did not have the capacity to carry them out, but what is the end result? I think it's really a judgment that you make, and I think a sober government makes judgments which have a long-term impact rather than. I always look at the role played by Lal Bahadur Shastriji in 1965-66. We could have pulverized Pakistan at that point, and Pakistan was at its worst point. But he realized that if India and Pakistan were already 2 countries that had to live in peace, he therefore agreed to the Tashkent agreement. So I think it's a question of how you look at issues. And I think
So
that's
was it a decision based on this peace-loving nature of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or was it a strategic restraint?
It was a strategy. I don't think we had time to discuss Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam at that point. And I can tell you there was so much of anger, even amongst members of the Cabinet Committee. One member of the Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs, not Karthik's father, told me that, you made a mess of this and now your recommendation is this, which is not for that kind of stuff. But he is the one who finally led, saying that yes, we cannot have this kind of a militant response, if I might use so. So I think it helps serve our purpose that we are a country that is restrained, that we do not act first and then think. We think and then act.
So I think the problem here is whether we are thinking, but Manish is pointing out we thought too much but didn't do much. So yes, that again leads us back to
that is true. But I want to be an Ambani. But what do I do? I'm thinking, but I must be able to act on it.
All right. So it leads us back to the question whether strategic restraint is an oxymoron, and are we caught in a quagmire, a strategic stalemate over these terms of strategic restraint, forward-leaning posture, as Manish calls it, and kinetic action. So, do we have a roadmap? Of course, it's very dynamic. The equilibriums change. Is there any lack of a roadmap when it comes to such situations? I think Manish directly and indirectly points to, correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a lack of certain doctrine, right? Which will there is something like a style sheet to look up to in such situations. Your comments.
Am I, or are you asking him?
It's already said it.
Anyway, the most important part of any national security doctrine is how flexible it is. You don't have a national security doctrine that says that you will always do this A, B, C based on it. Everything. It's a matter of what you want to achieve, and how do you achieve it? Is the answer? We're a big country. We have a huge military establishment, the land army, the air force, the navy, etc. Every nation in our neighborhood has reason to feel frightened about our might, but they don't. They are not. They would like to respect us rather than be frightened about us. And that is what is the essence of strategic restraint. You use it. You use it at a time where it will produce results. A national security doctrine by itself can only say this. I question the rationale of a national security doctrine as a panacea for each and every occasion. That is the point that I am making. For that matter, there are national security doctrines which are not publicized, if I might use to. But it's not a one shoe fits all or one size fits all sort of stuff. So it's important for you to, because different governments in India also will think differently. I'm sure that the present government has a different view than what happened in the period of Manmohan Singh. Now, for the country at large, the question is, do we want to carry out attacks on all our neighbors? Is that the way to prove that we are the largest and the biggest? Do we want to behave like quite often the United States has behaved in such situations? It went into Afghanistan. It has lost a whole lot of its people. It's had to withdraw from Afghanistan. So, what is the end result? So, I think we need to avoid this kind of positive. I'm not saying that the right or the wrong of it, but there is an end result that we would look for. And to some extent, it's based on the philosophical outlook of a nation and its country and its people. So that's the way I would.
Mr. Tewari,
Can I just add to that? You see, in my estimation, there is an ethical dilemma which has run across different governments going back to the late 70s, when Pakistan decided to use non-state actors in order to wage what is called a proxy war against India. So the ethical dilemma is that how do you deal with the depredations of semi-state actors or non-state actors? Do you do it with the use of conventional force? which clearly, as Mr. Narayanan outlines, has consequences, do you then adopt the same tactics which are being used against you, which then leads you to the ethical dilemma that should a democratic nation, should a nation based upon the rule of law, which has respect for the rules of the international order, be actually indulging in activities which clearly fall outside the pale of how nation states should really be behaving. And I think at the highest echelons of the Indian state, that dilemma, notwithstanding whatever allegations one keeps hearing from Pakistan about interference in Balochistan, etc., I don't think, and subject to correction by Mr. Narayanan, I don't think that dilemma has even been resolved now, though it's almost been 3 decades.
So the dilemma remains in both coercive diplomacy as also non-action or strategic restraint, right?
Look, I think strategic restraint has a far, far larger canvas, right? Therefore, if here the response is more tactical than strategic, so therefore, if you are repeatedly being subjected to attacks which clearly carry a cross-border linkage, or there is evidence to substantiate that it is emanating from across the border, then how do you deal with it? So therefore, if you try and deal with it with the use of conventional force, like Mr. Modi attempted in the case of Balakot, right? So therefore, you clearly did not only transgress beyond Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, but you went into what is Pakistan's sovereign territory, and that obviously carries the risk of escalation. And in the case of India-Pakistan, there are no off-ramps if there is an escalation. And in my book, I have mentioned that what if the Pakistanis had decided not to return Wing Commander Abhinandan? So therefore, we were up an escalatory spiral. However, Pakistan takes advantage of the fact that in a nuclear overhang, the options that you have are far and few and limited, and there are as many skeptics as supporters of a limited war. Ask the hard questions. And unlike in Kargil, where the then NDA BJP government actually allowed access to the front lines in Kargil, whereby what was happening, the nation was coming to know in real time, or at least as close to real time as possible. There has been a complete information blackout insofar as China is concerned. And I had, in fact, this was reported also, about 43 questions of mine since the September of 2020 on the situation China have been refused to be answered in Parliament on the specious grounds of national security. And that is not only that it's happened to me, it's happened to Dr. Subramanian Swamy, it's happened to Karthi, right? It's happened to many of our colleagues. In fact, every attempt which has been made to try and initiate a discussion on what is happening in Eastern Ladakh, what is happening in Arunachal Pradesh, has been met with a wall of silence by the NDA BJP government. I mean, they've rejected it outright, that we will not have a discussion, and those were not our parliamentary traditions. In 1962, at the height of the war, at the instance of Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was one among 4 members of the Jansangh in the Rajya Sabha, Prime Minister Nehru had a discussion in the Rajya Sabha and in the Lok Sabha for almost a week, from the 7th of November to the 15th of November 1962. In fact, of course, Mr. Vajpayee chose not to repay that courtesy when the Kargil war was going on, and every attempt to try and raise it in the Rajya Sabha was, stymied. But all I'm trying to say is that your legislative institutions have been dumbed down to the level of municipal councils. So therefore, the government is happy if there is a discussion on whether a road should be built or a particular bridge should be built or something should be done for rural development, which is also important. But on larger questions which impact the nation, whether economic, political or strategic, unfortunately over the past 7.5 years or 8 years, there has been no substantive discussion. Even when Parliament meets on the 14th of April, our attempts to try and raise a discussion, even though Ukraine will not be allowed.
So is it, where do we strike a balance? As in, either we are talking about national security in hushed tones and echo chambers. And it's an irony that on the other side there is also the social media, which is a free-for-all for all kinds of discussions. In between, the proper floor of a house, a parliament, is not open for MPs to debate and discuss. So what is it? Is it also because of the polarity, of the polarization you were speaking about? Is there a danger of sensitive and important topic like national security being trivialized, or while two parties fight over national security, it will be bad? Is that the fear? Or what's the way out?
Well, my sense is that the government doesn't want to take a position. You see, when there's a parliamentary debate, government will have to take a position on certain issues. And they obviously are completely chary for reasons which may be legitimate not to be taking those positions. And to say that the debate, let's suppose if you have a debate in China tomorrow, it will be highly polarized or it will be highly partisan. I do not think so. I think if you don't trust your supreme legislative institution to demonstrate a degree of responsibility, then I dare say you can hardly call yourself a democracy.
So it brings us to the question of the right balance between transparency and confidentiality, right? So it also takes a lot of goodwill and courage on the part of the political parties. So do you also advocate such things should be debated publicly, not just in Parliament?
Well, as I was earlier pointing out, where has been the debate on the Chinese transgressions? An objective debate on Chinese transgressions, even in the Indian media. I mean, leaving aside some media houses which, of course, have that degree of proportionality or balance. I mean, most of them have behaved like cheerleaders of the government. I mean, they've actually amplified, they have told, they have regurgitated what the government has been feeding them. I mean, I have not come across a single media house, and I regret to say that I was Information and Broadcasting Minister of this country, whose journalists have even attempted to go to Eastern Ladakh to try and see for themselves what is the situation on the ground. In fact, I think unfortunately the last 7.5 years have been a very sad commentary on the caricature which the Indian media has made out of itself. As Mr. Advani had very famously said, when they were asked to bend, they decided to crawl. The manner in which they have behaved, the media, and with great respect to you and your colleagues, I find, and you see, because what you are doing is, you are actually setting precedents. And the precedent for somebody who's a politician who will have to maybe deal with you from the other side of the bench, like we were earlier, now takes the message that if we are coercive with you, if we are as heavy-handed with you as these people have been, well, maybe that's the only way to actually make you fall in line. So while it may suit me temporarily, it does great damage to Indian democracy. So therefore, for your own sake, I would like to beseech your colleagues, to start standing up, because you're not sending out the correct signal, and this is going to have implications far beyond the term of this government.
Okay, coming back to probably a last question before the audience can shoot. So we are, back to the brass tacks, we are, when we talk about national security, we have two players, two neighbors, problem neighbors, Pakistan and China. So the author clearly says, looks deep into the 1,000 cuts that Pakistan is trying to inflict and bleed India on one side, and China, while holding hand and walking and being on a Jola diplomacy, at the same time having incursions from across the border. So the tone I got, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Tewari, do you mean to say that wherever you say that there was a lack of inaction, it's mostly on the Pakistan side, and on the China side, still questions remain, as in, do we go the political, more of the political overreach, while we go in for what you call the kinetic action against Pakistan? Is that such a combination which you think may work in the long run? And I'd like Mr. Narayan also to comment on that.
Well, I think, one of the themes which runs through the book, so there are 4 or 5 themes which run through the book if you look at it carefully. The first is that in the past 70 years, we've not been able to break out of our neighborhood. The legacy of partition, Kuwait Pakistan, the unsettled borders, Kuwait China, have kept us locked in South Asia. Number 2 is that if India has to surmount its developmental challenges, it has to find a way of getting peace on its periphery for 30 years. Something like what Deng Xiaoping did with China from 1979 till the time Xi Jinping came. And therefore you have to find a modus vivendi with both Pakistan and China. Number 3, till the time there is no integration of South Asia, economic, political, logistical, India will never achieve its true potential as being the largest player in the region. The 4th theme is, to answer your question, there's a complete mismatch between our national security expenditure and our national security challenges. Either you have to exponentially ramp up your national security expenditure, which includes your defense expenditure, or you need to bring down your challenges. And of course, the 5th thing, which is also critical and which is often not discussed, is the very intricate balance of civil-military relations. Unfortunately, we've seen that getting skewed, and there have been implications both during the term of Mr. Vajpayee and during the term of the successive UPA government. And I think these are certain critical areas where there needs to be multi-partisanship, at least a minimum consensus, notwithstanding our political differences on some of these issues.
So you're advocating a multi-party panel to look at such prices?
Well, I don't think you require a multi-party panel. What you require is basically a broad understanding that this is the trajectory which India as a nation would adopt. For example, on our foreign policy, there was a broad consensus going back to, let's say, the Asian Relations Conference of 1946, right till the 2008 nuclear deal, when the then NDA BJP government, after initiating the next steps in strategic partnership, actually brought a no confidence motion. I mean, before that, the only animated debate that you really had is over whether you should sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty or not. But that was also, a far more nuanced debate. So therefore, we've had this tradition whereby there's been a broad consensus. Unfortunately, that consensus has broken down, and I think there's a need to recreate that consensus, which can only happen through dialogue and communication, which is completely missing.
Mr. Narayan, the author says that we need 3 decades of peace if we have to integrate our military might, right?
To surmount our human developmental challenges, illiteracy, malnutrition, education, COVID-19 has shown how ramshackle our health infrastructure is. So basically, in order to get all those things which are essential for a human being to live with dignity right, you need to have peace on your periphery. You cannot be distracted all the time. And therefore, you need to find a modus vivendi, which is not easy to achieve with both Pakistan and China.
And the means to achieve that will have to be different for the different neighbors.
Yeah. I have nothing very much to add to. I mean, it's so self-evident, and I agree with Manish T saying that I think what this country needs most is peace with its neighbors, because I think we have problems we are surmounting many of them, I think we still have a long way to go.
Now, I would request our esteemed guest to ask any questions. Now, I would call upon Dr. Kanimori Somu, Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, who would be asking question to.
Sir, good evening. In continuation of your answer which you had given me about the national security and the finance which has been spent on that, the first question would be, the defense budget has decreased the percentage of GDP from 2.5% in 10-11 to 2.1 in 2021. This was against the Standing Committee on Defense recommendation to maintain the budget at 3% of GDP. In your opinion, how do you see this?
Well, actually, Mr. Narayanan would be in a better position to answer that question, but let me attempt it. You see, ultimately, any budgetary exercise is about competing demands on limited resources. And therefore, when you have so many other priorities, and unfortunately, if your economy is not growing at about 8 or 9%, which fortunately it grew between 2004 and 14, and even earlier during the Vajpayee years for the last 2 years, your ability to be able to then spend on priorities was far more flexible. And that's why not only the Standing Committee of Defence, but the Estimates Committee of Parliament, which was headed by the former President of the BJP, Mr. Murli Manohar Joshi, during the last Lok Sabha, actually had tracked the trajectory of defence expenditure. And I think in 2018, we were, as a percentage of GDP, as low as we were possibly at the threshold of the Sino-Indian conflict in 1962. But then there is another way of looking at it, which some of my colleagues, who've read the book, have a different view. And that view is that if you really look at it in terms of a percentage of government expenditure, government capital expenditure, defense expenditure has been going up. Now that's another view. But as I was pointing out, either you need to ramp up on defense expenditure, or you need to mitigate your national security challenges.
If you break down the military or the defense outlay, capital expenditure has increased only by 1.4% from the revised estimate of 1920 to budget estimate of 2021, while the pensions are increased by 13.6 and salaries are up by 5.6. While China is proposing to up its defense budget from 5.1 to 5.4 of GDP towards military modernization. How do you think India can counter the threat proposed by the China in this region?
Look, there's a 5-to-1 power differential which China has with India. And that's not only in the strategic or the military realm, it is now across the board. And so therefore, there is a considerable amount of innovative thinking that we would need to do. I mean, if you look at it currently, notwithstanding the standoff on the border, China continues to be India's biggest trading partner. Your balance of payments still continues to be hugely skewed in China's favor. So therefore, are alliances the way forward? The situation in Ukraine very clearly demonstrates that a friendly neighbor is much better than a distant agent provocator. I mean, for all of NATO's very sanctimonious homilies, it is more than 700,000 or 1 million Ukrainians who have become refugees, and their children dying in that country, and so therefore, so I think it's going to be a very tough balancing act going forward, because in many senses of the word, what Ukraine has done is that there's a new iron curtain which has descended across the world, and behind that iron curtain are going to lie the great civilizations of Russia, China, Iran, and their proxies. So therefore, this is going to really bring about a change in the world order as we knew it. because within Europe also, Germany would rearm. Japan is already talking about giving up its nuclear pacifism. So therefore, in the months and years ahead, India will have to be extremely nimble as to how it navigates this entire very complex situation which is going to evolve. And if you're going to have unsettled neighbors and unsettled borders, it's only going to make it far more complicated.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Advocate Narayanan, spokesperson, Indian National Congress.
Well, that's very simply, there are two things. One thing you pointed out is a strategic decision between diplomacy and in a democracy where you have to appeal to people. You're talking about the attack when it happened against the border, how NDA versus UPA acted. And in a democracy, we have the politicians had to get elected. And I think one of the reasons that UPA has lost is the perception of how we acted on the terror. And you may want to comment on that. The second one, you talked about the parliament not discussing important matters. Why are the subcommittees there? Can you not have secret sessions on subcommittees so that leakage happens? But still, at least it's not under the public purview. And why is it not happening in India? I'm sure it happens in the United States, where the top secrets are discussed with the senators and congressmen, and it need not be in the public purview. And then, of course, public also has certain views on camera. So why is it not being done, or is it being done?
Well, Mr. Narayanan, first of all, I don't agree with that analysis that we actually lost the 2014 elections because there was a perception that we were soft on terror. I think there were multifarious other reasons why we lost. The reason I contest that is because, when 26/11 was unfolding, in fact, the attack concluded on the 29th morning, if I remember correctly. And on the 30th of November, Delhi was voting. And I distinctly recall that the BJP, which was the principal opposition, had brought out these front page advertisements on the voting day of blood dripping, all over the place on those advertisements. They were really gory advertisements. And eventually the Congress won a third term in Delhi. And as Mr. Narayanan very rightly pointed out, in 2009, Dr. Manmohan Singh was given a ringing endorsement by the people. And our seats actually in Parliament went up from 146 to 206. So therefore, to say that we lost because there was a perception that we were soft on terror, I would not really agree with that proposition. It's another matter that it's my opinion that we could have acted in a more definitive manner. Mr. Narayanan has, of course, a different point of view, which I would not contest, since he was a practitioner and he was a decision maker. But to coming to your second point, I think there's a strange reluctance across the board to trust politicians with matters of national security. I mean, even when the Defense Consultative Committee or the Standing Committee meets, they would rather have you discuss CGHS schemes for ex-servicemen rather than anything more substantive than that. So, in fact, I was looking through before I came the last 3 meetings of the Defense Consultative Committee, and if you actually look at the agenda of those meetings, it gives you a fair sense that, governments, and when I talk about government, I don't talk about this government, I generally talk about governments. I don't think they really trust politicians with matters of national security. But that's unfortunate, but to a very large extent, given the manner in which we've polarized polity, or the manner in which we want to run or not run parliament, we are also responsible for some of the things.
In other countries?
Well, other countries' parliaments behave far more responsibly. I mean, I'll leave it at that, yeah.
Mr. Ramasubramanian.
Thank you. I just want to ask only one question. What is the action to be taken by India in the context of Russia-Ukraine problem. I think presently the government stand supporting Russia seems to be correct. But at the same time, on the base of the humanitarian issues, you may have to support Ukraine. What is going to be the impact of this conflict on India in the short term and also on the long term basis?
Well, subject to correction by Mr. Narayanan, it's my view that notwithstanding that we are between a rock and a hard place, I think the government has handled the situation well. They've handled it tactfully. We have our own security imperatives. I would have been much happier if Government of India would have at least called this a war or called this an aggression, which we have refrained from doing so. And I think we have been extremely sensitive to Russian sensitivities on this question. But going forth, if this turns into a far bigger humanitarian disaster than it currently is, then I'm afraid, notwithstanding our historical ties with the erstwhile Soviet Union, which morphed into Russia in 1991, we will have to take a far, far more firmer position.
Writer Ramki.
Hi sir, thank you. Actually, not sure whether you covered in the detail in the book, but I have to ask, 10 flashpoints in 20 years. Why not 30 years? Why 20 years? And actually, it should have started from the 1982. Is there any reason behind why 20 years?
No, I could have gone back 40 years also. I could have gone back 50 years also. I mean, that's not the point. In certain senses of the word, the 1998 nuclear tests were a defining moment for India. Right? In the sense that we decided to become a de jure nuclear power. Of course, the evidence points to the fact that we were a de facto nuclear power even before that. So, in my estimation, that was a good threshold to start the book. So that's the only reason why it starts with the 1998 nuclear test. But you're very right. I mean, you could go as far back as you want.
Rajasekaran, should we end that now?
Yes. Anybody in the esteemed audience?
Get one more.
Yes, Mike. I would be honored. He is senior most retired judge of the Madras High Court, our senior, Dr. Sudandram.
My humble vanakkam to everyone. Of course, though it was stated 20 years, it started from the first war like China, Ladakh. The one question, when it was put to you by Mr. Amit Shah, whether repealing Article 370, whether you are supporting or not, you have not answered. Still, is your position same?
No, in fact, you see, let me contextualize it for you. I had just finished leading the debate, and the Home Minister decided to stand up and ask the question. There was a din in the House. So I actually did not grasp the question in its fullness. But if you were to read the speech, and a lot of our colleagues were present in the House at that point in time, it was very, very clear that we were opposed to the dismemberment of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. We were opposed to the abrogation of Article 370. We subsequently voted against both those bills in the House. So our position was completely unambiguous. What I was trying to convey when I used that analogy of 50 Shades of Grey, which I got trolled for, and which became the defining moment of my speech, was that I was trying to tell him that Jammu and Kashmir is a far more nuanced and a layered problem. And if you think that by dismembering the state or by abrogating Article 370, you would resolve it, unfortunately, that's not the case. And now, 3 years down the line, Jammu and Kashmir continues to simmer. And since I come from the neighboring state, it is one of my trepidations that I hope that Jammu and Kashmir does not erupt like the way it erupted in 1989. And that would become very difficult to control.
The media wants to hold this book once again because some had come late. Just you have to stand up.
This is...
Replay.
Come here. You keep standing where you are. Yeah. So... Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Can we wrap up? Yeah. 2 minutes, please. Yes.
With that, we can call that the moderation and the discussion has come to a close. But before we end up, you should see the intellectual side of the author was tapped, though, like the political side was provoked. There are two incidents in the book. There are two things. One, as our Sri MKM has pointed out, is the nuclear. So the nuclear, he has well brought out from the smiling Buddha of 1971 to the diplomatic handing over reins of two parties. So it's not a polarized political. So he has beautifully, diplomatically, though he is a politician, as an author, brought out the handing over of a slip. I suggest that you read the book, where the nuclear policy was transferred and transformed for the betterment of the nation. So this is something which is beautiful in the book. So with that, we close this, and before we end, we have a small pleasantry to make. We congratulate the voice of Tamil Nadu and Mr. Rajasekaran, and today this is 4th year, and we want the dignitaries to be there when a cake is being cut. Please.
The digital TV, VOT24x7, which is telecasting this event live. So the 4th year, beginning of. So I want Mr. Karthi Chidambaram, Dr. Kanimuri Somu, and all the dignitaries just to come here, join the celebration. And the boss of this digital TV is my wife, Lakshmi Rajasekaran. Please come here.
Why don't we ask Mr. Narayanan to do
Yes,
the honors?
yes.
I shall eat the cake. That's good.
Shall?
Please. Come on. Voice of the abbreviation. Telecast on which is neutral and
I'm also going there. Come to the hotel afterwards. You're staying in the hotel. Yeah. I'll come. What do you have tomorrow morning? I'm leaving. What time? I have an 8 o'clock meeting. Okay, I'll come. Yeah. I just, the moment I finish from there, I'll give you a call. I'll come and have so that we will have an half-an-hour chat. We'll catch up for half an hour. That's a better way.
First, please come. Doctor.
And how are you?
I'm good.
Please.
So, come. Sir.
No. You have to cut the cake.
Sir, please.
No, I'll eat the cake.
That all of us
Okay.
can do.
Come. Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, all the best.
That is your job. That's your job.
Please. Just one cake. It's a cake and you can eat it too. Okay.
Cut funny.
He's well busy in Goa.
Cut funny.
Keeping the flock together. The result part is getting over, getting or not getting over. State it's a nice local, like where state and local matter.
Have to end the evening with the present please piano.
Sir, how are you, sir?
Have to end the evening with the present please.
This is just from our
pleasures all mine.
TV.
To you, sir. I'll give it. He gives me brick bats, sir. Not sir. Okay. Thanks. All the best. Okay, sir. I'll be in touch. Anyway, happy birthday in advance.
No, I'm actually trying to avoid this. Consuming stuff here and there.
No, but I'll.
You come here. You are the hero of the event.
Thank you.
I'll see you tonight.
Yeah, see you.
Thank you very much.